Hi, this is Mahipal Lunia with Immersion Foundation, and today we are hosting Mike Belzer Sensei, who has been very instrumental in me getting some of the Draeger's work moving, and also finding us an arc of imagination, an arc of knowledge that helps tie the work that we are doing back to Draeger Sensei and to Richard Burton. So with that, about 2 years ago, through a series of coincidences, Belzer Sensei and I connected, and he was extremely generous and mailed me some of Draeger's early talks that were in his private collection, and also the unpublished works of Dick Hayes and Don Draeger on their textbook of Hoplology. From getting that in early February of last year, we've met just about every Thursday, going through it with painful detail at some times, wondering what does this word even mean? Reading all the private letters between Draeger Sensei and Hayes. And it's just bringing that whole project back to life. Now, as a part of what we are doing with our symposium, looking at armed combat, especially the influence of the Spanish around the world, we've figured that trying to reintroduce and bring back hoplology into the public sphere is important and critical. So for that, and with that in mind, we invited Belzer Sensei to also present at the labs. But before we do that, we're beginning our podcast with what is hoplology? Who is Don Draeger? Why should we care? And where do we take it from here? So with that, I'm going to ask, welcome Belzer Sensei. Sensei, welcome aboard. And would love to get your story a little bit about your martial art background and how you got started in all of this and your meeting with Draeger Sensei.
Sure. Well, I started in a Hawaiian style of jiu-jitsu known as Danzan-ryu jiu-jitsu at the age of 9, and grew up doing that art. And I had moved from California to Virginia for a couple of years when my dad was doing some work with the Pentagon. And while we were there, we started a self-defense jiu-jitsu program because my brother, older brother, my dad, and I were all brown belts in this style of jiu-jitsu. And my dad heard that Don Draeger and some other experts from Japan were coming across the United States demonstrating classical martial arts for the first time, classical martial arts from Japan. And so he arranged for us to go and see the demonstration. And I was very impressed by what I saw. Draeger's a big guy, and he was demonstrating with 2 other smaller Japanese guys, and they had the kusarigama, the sickle with the chain and the ball, and it was like very impressive, and sticks and swords. So I purchased his book, Asian Fighting Arts, and started to read that at the age of 13, and was just super impressed and blown away that this one person knew all this, and the pictures, and all over the world, and all the fighting styles. And little did I know that 4 years later, when I was graduating high school, I had some friends that had moved to Japan, and they invited me to come and spend the summer with them. Why don't you come here or spend the summer with us, and you can do your martial arts thing. So my dad said, Don Draeger makes his base in Japan, in Tokyo. Why don't you write him a letter? So I think, well, how do I write him a letter? This is back in 1974. So it's literally letter writing time, and that's it, or a phone call. He said, write to the publisher, and the publisher will get the letter to him at some point. So I did that, and lo and behold, about a month later, I did get a letter from Don Draeger, and he said that he would be leaving for the jungles of Borneo to do research on another book, but he wished to make contact with me at this time. He addressed me as Dear Mr. Belzer at that time. You say you bought my book. Was it hardcover or softcover? Where did you buy it? And please contact me because I'll be gone on research expedition soon. So I wrote back right away and introduced myself and what my background was and what I was interested in doing. And he wrote back. I got a letter about 2 weeks before I left for Japan, saying, "Dear Mike, thank you for your introduction, and I'd be happy to teach you or show you what I know about the Japanese martial arts. I will be out on research expedition when you get here. Contact Howard Alexander. He's a student and friend of mine, and he will assist you until I return." Just a hint, what you're doing in California is probably very different than what is happening in Japan. Please keep an open mind. Let the Japanese show you what they are doing. I'll see you when I return, Don Draeger. So that's how I made contact with him. And then through Howard Alexander, I was invited to start training and doing some stick fighting. Would you like to do something interesting and different? You can come to my stick fighting dojo. 18 years old, doing Aikido every day over at the Aikido Hombu, living right around the corner. I had found a spot. Sure, of course. So I went to this stick fighting dojo. I didn't know it was the dojo of Don Draeger. I didn't know that the headmaster was Shimizu Takagi, who demonstrated with him at that demonstration, 4 years ago. It was just an interesting place. And this was my first experience with the Koryu of Japan, one of the classical martial arts of Japan, the Jo, which is the 4-foot staff. So began training there, and a few months later, we heard at the dojo, Don Draeger is coming to the dojo. Oh, wow, great. I have a chance to meet him. So he did come and started to practice with everybody. It was just a small group. We trained on Monday and Wednesday afternoons for a couple of hours, 1 to 3 p.m. And it was mainly a foreigners class. He trained with each of us. It was a very interesting training with him. But I didn't have a chance to actually meet him until after the class. I saw Draeger and Shimizu standing at one end of the dojo. I was at the other, and finally it clicked. That little guy was the Japanese guy that Draeger was demonstrating with, along with another gentleman named Kaminoda Sensei. And I just kind of blurted out, "I know you guys." And they looked over and like, what are you talking about? And I said, "I'm Mike Belzer from California." And Draeger said, "Oh, the California kid. Great, glad you made it." So that's how I made my first contact with Don Draeger at the age of 18 at the Rembukan Dojo.
So what was it like apprenticing with Draeger Sensei from that point on, from meeting him to,
So
the following years?
Yeah, I think the important thing to know is that he came to the dojo a few times while I was in Japan. I was in Japan for about 9 months, a school year between high school and college. And so it wasn't like I was a daily student of Don Draeger. I was just another guy in the dojo. I was a kid, 18. And when it was time for me to leave, he happened to be there, and he said, "We are developing a method of studying the weapons, fighting systems, and styles of warriors. It's the study of human combative behavior known as hoplology. If you're interested in this type of thing, let's stay in touch by letter, and I will keep you up to date on what's going on." Okay, great, I'm interested. So I'm back in California, back in Los Angeles, getting ready to go to Santa Monica College and then later UCLA. And we are maintaining contact by letter. He's going back and forth to the University of Hawaii to present lectures on Budo and Bujitsu, the Kiai, Buddhism in martial arts, all with a bent towards hoplology. But he was kind of moving that term under the radar while he was presenting this kind of Japanese martial arts study at the East-West Center. and he would write and say, Mike, can you have some of your friends write letters of interest about this type of thing so that the University of Hawaii can see that we've got a lot of interest from not just in Hawaii, but on the mainland. So I would have my friends write letters, and that's what we would do. Amazingly, in 1979, I got an invitation to attend the first International Jodo Jamboree. So Jodo is the modern art of Jiu-Jitsu. At that time, the practice of it was basically the same. Now it's kind of split apart a little bit. But Don Draeger would be teaching it. And it's the first international gathering for people that are around the world that want to come and practice this. It's a 5-day camp. So in my mind, I'm thinking kind of Enter the Dragon, like, you know, lines of people with the sticks and practicing, and Don Draeger in front, and I'm at the end kind of looking over, trying to see what's happening and following along. And absolutely, sign me up. I'll follow all the directions. The invitation was sent by a gentleman named Karuna Karan, an actual personal student of many years of Don Draeger in Malaysia, of the art of Shindo Musoryu Jiu-Jitsu. So I wrote to him and said, okay, I'll do this. I'll get my passport and my shots and the plane flight to Malaysia, and the train here and the bus there, and go to this hotel. I told him all that. And then I wrote to Draeger and I said, this is what I'm planning to do. And he wrote back and he said, that's great, Mike. I want to say thank you for the sacrifice you're going to make, because I know it's a sacrifice. It'll be worth it. You'll meet many good people and make friendships that will probably last for a lifetime. I don't mean to mess up your plans, but if you want to go the cheap way like I do, why don't you fly to Japan? You stay with me. From there, we'll fly to Bangkok, and then we'll take the train, which is the cheap way, from Thailand down into Malaysia. It's a 25-hour train ride. So I'm thinking, I just got invited to travel with Don Draeger personally. There must be a group of people. Yeah, that's it. Maybe 5 or 6 guys are all meeting there, and we'll all go together. Sounds good. So I said, okay, I'll do it. And it turns out there was one other guy that was supposed to be traveling with us, but he got sick. And so it was just me, and Don Draeger picked me up at the airport. We went out, had some food, went back to his 2-room apartment in Narita, stayed there, I think two nights, traveled around Tokyo for him to say goodbye to a few people, including one elderly martial arts researcher named Watatani Sensei, who was in the hospital. He said, you know, I don't know if he's going to be able to survive this experience, so I want to say goodbye to him, because when I come back, he may not be here. So we said hello and goodbye to him. And then we took the train, we took the flight, and we took the train, and I had a chance to interview him on the train ride. And that was my first introduction to hoplology, from Don Draeger, really that train ride.
What an adventure. What an adventure.
What an adventure. Yeah. And so then, you know, we did the camp, 5-day camp, which was a great experience, training 3 times a day. And then after that, he had some free time, about another week or so. I had already planned for extra time. He said, if you'd like, I could take you around and introduce you to some of the master teachers that I'm currently interviewing for various books. You know, he called them his punch kick books that he could produce fairly quickly, get them on the market, make some money. He was like a lot of martial artists, which is, you know, from one hand to the mouth to the other hand.
Yep.
You know how it goes.
Yeah.
Didn't have a lot of money, and so he had a veteran's pension from the Marine Corps. He also taught English in Japan. And then he got some money from the books, but it wasn't like, it was a big money maker. But anyway, I said, absolutely. So we went to see Chai Kim of the Shaolin style of Kung Fu. We saw the Phoenix Eye Fist Master, who uses the individual knuckle as the striking point.
That
We
was my
saw
first book that I
Tan.
got.
Oh yeah, that's awesome. Mr. Tan, the six-finger healer that was connected to the Phoenix Eye Fist. He worked on my elbow. That was fun. The Penchak Silat Master, Master Raman for Silat Sini Gayung, Master Anbanthan of the Salambam, Indian Salambam stick fighting, and others, and including Li Pit Lai, combat Tai Chi master. So he would take me there, and he would bring interpreters, and Karuna would usually be with us and explain that Mike was a martial artist from Los Angeles, is interested in seeing what you do and how you do it. And then we would try techniques, and I gave him, what if you got the headlock? What if you got the punch? What if you got the kick? And they would show. I made the mistake of asking the Master Raman of Silat Sini Gayung, do you have joint locks in your system? And he said, yes, we do, and set about to put me into various painful locks. And I got pictures of all this taken by, of course, Don Draeger.
Wow.
Yeah, so that was that experience of about 3 weeks traveling with Don Draeger and having that experience. So after that, at the airport, I was just kind of like, how do you even say thank you? Or he just said, you don't have to say anything. His words aren't needed. Next time you'll go on the long trip with us. He said, I didn't want to bring that up this time. You're more than welcome. We want you with us. It's just, one step at a time, and you'll come next year. So I said, when I go back, there's no Shindo Muso Ryu in California. What should I be doing? He said, well, you need to be training in a weapons-based system, because weapons will teach you things that empty hand styles just can't. And so in my mind, I had known that Dan Inosanto was teaching this Filipino art of Kali, Eskrima, and Arnis. I knew he was down in Torrance. And so I made plans to make contact down there. I did. I got on the waiting list. I was called, okay, we're starting a new beginners class on Friday evenings. This is back in probably September, October of '79. And that's when I started at the old Kali Academy in Carson.
Wow. So what do you remember from the 3 weeks with Draeger Sensei, specifically when it comes to hoplology or things like that? Yeah.
Well, what was interesting, of course, is he couldn't tell me a lot of detail, because all of this was going to be presented, revealed in a textbook. And so some of the questions I would ask, mainly about how to deal with fear and the stress of really dealing with a life-threatening encounter. He said, we're going to be presenting all of that type of thing in the textbook that we're developing. You see, concurrently with the pen pal relationship I had with Don Draeger, I had received a letter from the co-author of the textbook, or who was to be the co-author of the textbook, a gentleman named Richard Hayes. And I received this letter. Remember, I'm age 21. I received this letter, handwritten, and it said, "Dear Mr. Belzer, my name is Richard Hayes. Don Draeger suggested that I write to you. Perhaps you can answer some questions about this new style of jiu-jitsu that has been developed by Professor Wally J, which involves, he calls it small circle. And as if you are changing things from one level to the next. You know, Aikido uses big circles and Kodokan Judo uses what he would call medium circles. Now you have this guy that's working on small circles. How does this change shifting, stepping, stancing? And I'm reading it. For example, this is the type of letter that I would get. Okay. So I wrote back, I said, dear Mr. Hayes, thank you for your letter. I really don't know what you're talking about. Could you start from the beginning? And he wrote back right away, dear Mike, thanks for your letter. First, there was the Big Bang. Then the universe was formed. And I thought, okay, that's funny. But then he went on and on and on and got more letters. And then he gave me the history of the Stone Age and, you know, the rise of the tribe and the small band of hunters and the Bronze Age and the city state and on and on and on. So then I also made the mistake of not answering a couple of his questions. Dear Mike, you failed to respond to bop, 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 you know, please respond. And so it went back and forth like that. And so from 1970, gosh, I probably got the first letter from him in 77, maybe. I had a ongoing relationship with Richard Hayes, just like I had with Don Draeger, but a lot more interaction because, you know, Don Draeger had all his responsibilities of his own training, his own research, his own traveling, teaching English and all that. And so had a very small window to answer the correspondence of all the hundreds of letters that would come in from people all over the world, because everybody's reading the books. We're waiting for the next Don Draeger book to come out, you know, and people would write him and he wrote you back. Just like he wrote me back. Who am I? I'm nobody. I'm just somebody that is interested. So I was able to ask Hayes all the different questions, and he was able to give me a lot more of kind of the general scope of what they were working on. But even he would say, I can't go into detail about that because that'll be revealed in the textbook. And then when you read the letters from Don Draeger to Dick Hayes, you can see that they are concerned about giving up details of what they're working on because they don't want to be scooped and have somebody else present some of this information. So things are moving on. I'm getting, look, this box, this is
people have no idea.
This is one box of the letters from Dick Hayes. Okay. Okay.
Yeah, people.
Okay. So, and sometimes he'd run out of paper. So he would just take envelopes and pull open the envelopes and read and write on them. But part of what we need to know about him is that he had, he saw combat in Korea. Draeger was a Marine in World War II, saw action in the Pacific, and Hayes was in the Army. And he thinks that his immune system got severely compromised by possibly a gas attack in Korea. And so he became a universal reactor, not quite a bubble boy, but one level under. And so if he wore the wrong clothes, he would begin to asphyxiate. If he ate the wrong food, same thing, he would have an extremely bad allergic reaction. So he was housebound in a apartment co-op situation up in Seattle. He was married to a Japanese woman who lived in the unit next door along with her mother, and they cared for him. All he could really do is read. And so he would read multiple newspapers, multiple magazines, journals, books, And then he would write the authors letters with questions. And that's exactly what happened with Don Draeger. I know that he read, of course, Asian Fighting Arts, but it was probably one of the classical Budo or Bujitsu books. He wrote a letter to Don Draeger, and Don Draeger wrote him back. I think I've got what I've got here. Okay, so this is a copy of a letter that Hayes wrote to the publisher of Asian Fighting Arts. So that was the book that he had written. Oh, and also Classical Bujitsu and Classical Budo. This was December 1st, 1974. Okay, so I am in Japan at that time. Dear Mr. Kobayashi, many thanks for your informative letter of June 28th, which I appreciate very much. Yes, I admire Mr. Draeger's scholarly books and have both his classical Bujitsu and classical Budo, as well as his Asian Fighting Arts with Smith. I look forward to his third volume, Modern Budo and Bujitsu. Will you kindly ask Mr. Draeger to whom I may write in order to place my subscription with the new publication, the bi-monthly Martial Arts International? I cannot locate the address. And then it just goes on. You know, he's interested in asking about this and that. This is the letter from Don Draeger written on an aerogram. Aerograms were folded up so that they could be mailed like a letter. And so he could buy these pre-stamped and take them anywhere he wanted and write, fold it up and put it in a mailbox. So this is dated 18th January, 1975. Dear Mr. Hayes, during the very busy end of the year and the New Year activities, I had occasion to see Mr. Kobayashi. He informed me that you had written to him. Inasmuch as your letter involves me, Mr. Kobayashi, Mr. Kobayashi has asked me to answer your letter. Your observations are all noted. Kenjutsu was a more popular expression, but the term Kenpo signifies the emphasis on ethical value over those of technique, and therefore some Ryu preferred the latter form. The latter term is known to have been used during the Muromachi area. Po refers to method, the way of doing something, but can also have the meaning of law or effective method. It's a lay term, but it's also used by Buddhist clergy. He goes on, he talks about terms of Mushin, Fudoshin, says, he gives the address to purchase the magazine. Sorry to be so abrupt, but the matters you broach here are tremendously involved. Even if I had the time, which I don't, it would be impossible to write about them in a short space of letters. I'm planning some future books on these matters, but they are many years away. Thank you for your kind words about my new series with Weatherhill. Best, Don Draeger. Okay, so, you know, that was a polite letter that answered some of his questions and said, I can't do this by letter. Stay tuned for the books. Okay, so that was on, that's in 1974. The next letter that we have from Don Draeger to Richard Hayes, that's in the file of all the Draeger to Hayes letters, and I'll tell you how I got those next, is the 8th of January, 1978. Okay, so a period of a few years has gone by. All right, so how did I get the letters from Don Draeger to Richard Hayes? Okay, so I'm back in 79. You know, things are moving along. I'm hearing that the Hoplology Center in Hawaii is going to happen. There's 10 acres on the big island. There are plans to to build this training center and bring different teachers from all over and all of that. And so I'm putting my energy towards, I'm going to be involved in that. It turns out that Draeger started to get sick. And what had happened on that long expedition in '79 is that everybody that was on it, there were probably 4 or 5 guys, they got sick. They got sick with very bad amoebic dysentery. They all ended up in the hospital somewhere in there for many weeks. And it turns out that they think they were poisoned by someone from the Aceh tribe, a medicine man from one of the Aceh tribes that they were visiting in, I believe it was Sumatra. And they think feces had been put into their food. Anyway, everybody finally recovered, but Draeger never really fully recovered. He started to have big problems with circulation, especially down in his legs. One of his legs, I think his left one, really swelled up badly. He kind of recovered from that. In 1980, he participated in a European tour of classical martial arts. He went with the Katori Shinto-ryu people and the Shindo Muso-ryu people. It was Kaminoda from Shindo Muso-ryu, and it was Otake Sensei and his son from the Katori Shinto-ryu, and they demonstrated all over Europe. And you can see elements of that demonstration on YouTube. It's all there. And he looks like he's moving great, moving fine. But he really started to go downhill in '81. And he ended up back in Hawaii for treatment at a VA hospital, and then finally went back to the mainland, to Wisconsin for more treatment. And I believe in October of 1982, he passed, and he was at 60 years old. So that was a huge blow. Nobody was expecting that. And shortly after that, I received a letter from Dick Hayes, and he said, Mike, I've got my own health problems, and I don't know how long I'm going to be along. I'm surprised I'm alive now. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to transmit all the information that I have been sending to Don Draeger to you. And the reason that I'm doing that is because I don't know what happened to all the letters. If you think this is a lot of letters, imagine what, and this is just one box, imagine what Don Draeger got, and Draeger had said, look, Richard, it's okay. I read them, I make notes, I file them, okay, but nobody could find them. Now his place isn't that big, so he may have had put them some other place, but bottom line is nobody ever got back to Dick Hayes, says, hey, we got all your stuff. So Dick says, I'm going to transmit it all to you. How is he going to do that? He's going to write letters, right? So I'm also going to give you the cassette tapes that I've received from Don Draeger, because they exchanged cassette tapes about subjects, various subjects for hoplology. And along the way, there was some private stuff about, here's what's happening here, here's some issues here, here's what happened in my life growing up. I think it bears on what we're talking about now. And Draeger was a very private guy, and so he didn't talk a lot about his personal life. So that's what's happening. I'm getting now multiple letters, and it covers about 8 topics. So I start highlighting different color for different topics. And then I take it to a secretary, a professional secretarial service, and we're at word processing land now. And so she starts to type it up. I look it over, I send it back to him. He corrects, he puts arrows, he rearranges, send it back to her, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And over a period of maybe 9 months or so, we're able to produce a spiral bound notebook. Let me get it. This is what we ended up with. and we called it Hoplology Theoretics Volume 1, Conceptual Tools for the Hoplologist. So now these are all outtakes from his letters, all categorized, the IAT, MAT. These are talking about the combative traits that they identified, the general alarm system, general inhibition syndrome, the low, mid, and upland of performance, the means ends diagram, the place-time matrix, the architecture structure of hoplology, scholarship of hoplology, field notes. This is the kind of field notes that they would make when they were out studying systems. So this is the book that I told you about. That this is like the first draft, maybe, of the textbook. Yeah. And I said I could send it to you if you want, but I don't
Not gonna
think
make sense.
really gonna get much out of it, because you know how things are. If it doesn't grab your attention right away, and there aren't many pictures, no videos, some diagrams, there's a tendency to just kind of have you glaze over. Great, I got all the notes from Draeger to Hayes to Belzer, put it in the old bookshelf, and I'm good. So it would be a waste.
Yes.
So that's when I said, look, when I finish this book with Hayes, Hayes said, now you need to take it to Hunter Armstrong and David Hall. They were the two people that had really taken the ball of hoplology after Draeger died, and they were trying to move it along to help it grow to the next level. They renamed the International Hoplological Research Center, IHRC, to the International Hoplology Society. And they were moving this thing along. They were working closely with Dick Hayes. And he said, Mike, I want you to get with them. So I got with them up in Berkeley, because David Hall was doing either master's or PhD research up at Berkeley. And he said, I want you to read it to him. Now, I don't know these guys. I've never met them, right? Maybe by letter. So here's the introduction. Now, down here I wrote, written by Dick Hayes and Don F. Draeger, edited by Michael Belzer. Here's the foreword. This is from Richard Hayes. This lecture is not a real lecture insofar as the material has been culled from my attempt to reconstruct some of the themes and subjects Don and I discussed over a number of years, with a hoplology textbook as the eventual goal. So rather than a smooth and painless listening usual to a lecture, this is a jerky and disjointed listing of items of interest to Don and myself, with a textbook in view. Each of you will receive a copy of the manuscript. Because the subjects are new to you, it would be best to read each paragraph along with Mike reading it out loud. After each paragraph, there will be a break for questions and answers. Please ask questions, because otherwise a full understanding of the subject won't be arrived at. Only when a paragraph has been discussed to everyone's satisfaction should Mike begin the next paragraph. Now, these guys are also corresponding with Hayes, which of course I know. So he's torturing them as well. Though Mike can answer anything you ask him, if you should have other questions in the future, just drop me a note and I'll send a reply. Though there are separate subjects, 7 of them, they all interact. And at the end of the lecture, there'll be a general discussion period to explore this overall interaction. That's what we started with. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. The 8th one is what I added, which is the field notes, which I just thought would be interesting for people to be able to see. There was a form that they filled out every time they looked at a new system. So I said, if you want, Mahipal, I'll do it the same way I did it with these guys.
Yes, sir. You
because
did.
that's the only way it's going to make any difference at all. And this was, how long ago was this? 20 years ago, 30 years ago? I haven't really looked at this stuff. I hadn't at that time in 25 or 30 years. So it was a tremendous and awesome step back into time for me to go through all this and review it. And I have to say that the only reason I did it is because I saw from what you were doing and what you described to me and what you showed to me that Don Draeger would have been very proud and happy to see that there's another generation of hoplologists out there that are actually doing what he did, going out, doing expeditions, doing it to the highest level possible, bringing anthropologists, bringing sociologists, bringing your high-def video cameras so that you can actually share it with people. Creating the Immersion Lab, which is bringing in teachers from all over to give people the experience. It's exactly what he was talking about doing, and you can talk about it and you can vision it, but until you actually do it, you don't know how it's going to come out. And I could tell that you had done it. You're walking the talk. You are sincere. And he would have loved to have you on one of his expeditions. So I said, I'm moving up in years. When I'm 66 now. When I was 60, I created a PowerPoint presentation about the life of Don Draeger and his impact on the martial arts. And I had, up until the pandemic, I have been going to different studios and dojo and training groups to kind of bring Don Draeger alive, because a lot of people are familiar with the name, know that, oh yeah, he's that guy that wrote the books, but they don't really know. So, but at the end of this PowerPoint lecture, I'm able to share elements of those tapes that a lot of people have not heard before. A few have put together so that we can take an outtake of Don Draeger speaking. Sounds like he's talking to you. We can read letters that he's written. We can see photos and video that are out there on the internet. And then we can talk about his life, growing up as a little kid, moving to Japan, before that being in the Marines, and by the end, my goal is people will feel like, God, I really feel like I know him. And he is the one that modernized hoplology from the original that kind of Richard Burton had taken it to. And of course, his goal was we have to develop and train a new generation of hoplologists to go out and do this. And that's exactly what you and others are doing. Many other people are doing it. We just didn't know there was a name for it. You don't have to be a professional hoplologist. You can be interested in hoplology, and you can learn things about it that will really help your personal study of the martial arts and open your mind to look at others and gain value from them.
Yeah, no, thank you for that, Sensei. I mean, just for the listeners, as Sensei said, even if we just put the book up there, you probably wouldn't get beyond page 2. It's a hard read. And I think I tortured Sensei enough over the last 2 years, and he's been so kind and so generous in working with me every Thursday, going through it painfully, one paragraph at a time, quizzing me on things and whatnot. We had a few ups and downs in life, but we managed to still stay quite disciplined and get through it. And just like Sensei said, kind of brought Draeger Sensei alive. And I think most people know nothing about Dick Hayes. And I think without him, I think.
So that's the important thing to remember and know about Hayes, is that, remember, Don Draeger is a busy guy, but we all have to survive, and you got to pay the bills, and you got to put food in your mouth. So he's got all these book projects that he's doing, and of course he's got hoplology on his mind. But it wasn't until Dick Hayes that he's like, here's a mind, because they never met each other. It was all through letters. Here's a mind that I can go back and forth with, and I can do things with. And his letters quickly evolved. So the January 8th letter, he's talking about, again, different words, ko bujitsu, ko budo, fudoshin, analyzing fudoshin, just Japanese terms, still signing it cordially, Don F. Draeger. Then, 27th of January, dear Richard, of January 1978, dear Richard, what can I say? After your epistle, anything I can come up with would be an also ran. But it is good to learn more about you, and your letter did the trick. I hope that we can maintain contact through my schedule in writing, though my schedule in writing is about 10 hours a day on the typewriter. On writing day, that is. Then he says, hoplology. The word can be found in big dictionaries. It's an old academic discipline mentioned by Frobenius, Sir Richard Burton, and that era of scholars. It centers on the study of weapons and combative arts of the world. Technically, it even includes the combative behavior of animals, the latter study, which is today included in ethology. I am said to be the modern pioneer of hoplology. It fell into disuse about 100 years ago. For about 15 years, I've been building its theory and methods, and now I'm engaged in writing the first textbook. We have tried it at various institutional levels, museum, cultural institutions, universities, both undergrad and grad levels, and it is slowly catching on. The students love it, but the established academic hoi polloi are divided. Some support us, some are indifferent, others attack. But survival is inherent in the nature of hoplology, and the hoplologists I have trained are slowly gaining ground. Just what we do would fill a book, but I might summarize that we have all types in terms of personal interest. There is no field of interest that we cannot use and convert to hoplology. We have anthropologists, archaeologists, ethnologists, linguists, historians, sociologists, engineers, medical, forensic, me, lab technicians of all types, etc. About 16 have engaged in serious training with me over the years. That's his core group. It is our hope to establish a full department at some university and eventually to award degrees in the discipline, which, by the way, is interdisciplinary in nature. There's more, but that was it. That was the switch. January 27th, 1978. That's when he first is getting together with Hayes. And then over time, it goes from, your words are very important. Your concepts are going to be included in the textbook. Then it moves on to, I hope that you will provide some input. And then it was, I would like to ask you to be my co-author in this book. Yeah.
It was quite a development of a friendship, and I think scholarly respect both ways. I mean, as we went through the letters, that was quite obvious.
Right. And just a question or a comment about time. It goes by so fast. This podcast interview is going by tremendously fast. I did make notes on my experience with Dick Hayes and the development of the textbook and all that. And I brought out what I thought was the most important part, which includes these combative aptitude traits, these traits that they identified, which they called the guts of the theory of hoplology. So I can make that available to the people that are involved in our gathering that's going to happen in March. And so at some point, they'll have a written record of my experience there. And
that'd be wonderful, Sensei. Thank
so
you.
I call it, How Did We Get Here?
That's amazing, Sensei. And just a side note, you know, I mean, as Sensei and I have read these letters every week, it's very interesting to see the dynamic between the two, which is Draeger Sensei and Hayes, and it kind of goes from him being a pain in the ass, for the lack of a better word, to, oh my God, I can't get rid of this guy, to no, he's got some great points. Okay, how do we work together?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay, so this is how we got here. So Sensei, I think this will be a good place to close this, and in the coming weeks we'll go into the guts of it, the guts of their work, and examine the big ideas one at a time, so that people get a flavor for it. And Sensei, as you and I had discussed, we should also figure out how we bring your presentation into this loop so that we can upload it for the people here.
Right. Sounds great.
All right. So with that, see you guys in episode 2. Thank you again, Sensei.
Thank you, Mahipal.
For some, it's the quest of an empire. For some, it's been the quest of power and riches. For some, the quest for honor. And yet for others, the quest for freedom. Blades and bladecraft have done just that. So Richard Burton has said, the history of the sword is the history of mankind. And that's the journey we are on. No blade culture has defined the world as much as the Spanish bladecraft. And yet, no art develops in a vacuum. It is shaped by those that it interacts and fights with, and also shapes the cultures, whether they are conquered or manage to maintain their freedom. In this particular lab, we're going to look at how Spanish bladecraft influenced arts across the 5 continents. We've traversed 20,000 plus miles, brought in teachers with over 700 years of combined bladecraft experience, together in one place at one time, where over 3 days and 40 hours of non-stop training, you will be able to see and experience firsthand how it shaped Europe, how it shaped the bladecraft of Northern Africa, how it developed the arts, both indigenous and otherwise, in Philippines. Moving over to Latin America, from the jungles of Colombia and Panama, how the arts of machete developed. Coming further up north, looking at the arts of the southwest Mexicali region, where the long bullwhip was developed. Or looking at the development of a very American form of fighting, the Bowie bladecraft. The impact on the Asian martial arts itself, with the Chinese art being completely transformed by fencing and fencing footwork. Lastly but not the least, is looking at the biomechanics of what full contact bladecraft does, how it shapes your movement and what works and what doesn't work. This is the experiment we are embarking on. The lucky few who come here will get a view of 500 years of bladecraft that developed across 5 continents, and the relationship between the conquerors and the conquered, between the wannabe conquerors and the freedom fighters, between those who fought as pirates and those who fought to maintain their honor. This is that experiment. This is holy blood, holy blade. For more information,